Hello and welcome to Insiders, a podcast all about the world of television with me, Peter Fincham.
And me, Jimmy Mulville.
This is the podcast for people who love TV and who want to know a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes in show business.
I always think that opening is a little bit, it's quaint, isn't it? Behind the scenes in show.
And really it's behind the scenes in television, because show business can mean, theatre and
that's
music.
what the rest of entertainment do. They do a brilliant job covering all the different...
Maybe we should have a word with Owen and tell him to scrub up our intro and give ourselves a slightly fresh intro.
Oh, I don't think Owen's a fan of change.
Okay, we might have to do it ourselves.
He wears the same shirt every week.
I thought it was a dress. So what have you been up to, Jim? Have you had a busy week?
I was up in Liverpool, my hometown, this week. And I feel a bit weird saying this, but I have a book out.
So you do, and you have a book reading or something, an interview or recital, and we're all busy thinking up excuses why we're busy that evening.
Oh, no, honestly, you don't have to come. Only the publisher said, can you send as many invitations as possible to people you know? And a part of me is, listen, I'm very pleased that they've published it, but a part of me is dreading the next few weeks of going around and doing those kind of things. So
hang on, tell us about your book. Come on,
I couldn't invite.
You can't plug your own book on your own podcast. Then
I feel a bit queasy about doing this, but anyway, it's called. There's going to be a show, and they picked that title, the publisher, because it's the line of a song that we sing at Everton Football Ground. It's not a great song, I'll be honest with you. And the home with the Beatles could have come up with something better, but they plucked that title out because they said, well, you're in show, talking about show business. You're in show business, so we'll call it. But it's called Everton and Me, A Complicated Love Story, because it tracks my relationship with my football club, which mirrors my relationship very much with my family and my city, because I left to come and hang out with people like you in 1974.
Yes, and you keep going back. You've been back in Liverpool the last week.
I have, and I've gone back more since I've got older. That's the thing. I ran away in 1974, kind of came to London, knocked around with, ne'er-do-wells like you. And then 20 years later, I got a season ticket with my uncle and my stepfather. And that opened a door to go back to my city every 2 weeks, but also to get to know my family again. And now I'm very involved with the city. It's a journey. The book, the football thing is just a MacGuffin, which takes me on this journey. Anyway, I enjoy doing it. So here's the thing, you get to an age where I enjoy doing it. So I don't really care if anyone reads it. I mean, genuinely, I just enjoyed doing it. It was a nice thing to do.
I think I'm right in saying that when the Beatles were at the height of their fame, you mentioned the Beatles, Liverpool slightly turned against them because they said they never come back.
Yeah.
Because they'd gone down to London, then they bought themselves houses in places like Esher and Weybridge and so on, down in Surrey, because they were very nice houses indeed. And they made a lot of money. Yeah. And sort of Liverpool had a rather kind of weird attitude to them, said, well, they don't play the Cabin anymore. Yeah. Because they were playing the Hollywood Bowl or whatever.
That's a problem, is there is an element of betrayal.
Yes.
And Dennis Potter points this out in that 1993 lecture where he says, he's a bright boy at a state school in the Forest of Dean. His teacher spots that and says, you could get to Oxford if you work hard. And he said, I didn't realise at the time that by accepting that offer readily and wanting to get into that world, which he could feel coming out of the wireless every evening of these well-spoken people who lived different lives to the one he was living, he said, I didn't realise that inherent in that, folded up in that deal was a implicit betrayal of where I was from, and it took me a long time to get home.
But whenever the moment, the equivalent of the Dennis Potter moment was for you, and you thought you could get into Cambridge in your case, and by the way, I've just been filming in Cambridge for a couple of days, so I literally just come back from there. Had somebody said, well, no, there's a very strong regional policy going on now, Jimmy, and we'd rather you applied to Hull University or whatever, that would have been an odd thing to say.
It would, and it would have
been. Nothing wrong with Hull University, by the way, because our friend Andy Harris went there. So just
nothing wrong with Hull.
No.
If you like fish, that's the truth. The truth is that we talked about it last week when Phil Ridman's talked about the Oxbridge set. Is that it was a meritocratic system. You had to do well in your A-levels to get considered to go to a place like Oxford or any great university. So there wasn't a sense of achievement. And my father was really encouraging of that. And he said, there are two ways of doing well in this city. One is football and one is education. I've seen you play football. I suggest you get an education. So
to be fair, another one was to form a pop group and conquer the world.
But none of my family.
But I have heard you sing. I have actually accompanied you at the piano, Jimmy, and I think you chose the right route.
That was terrible. We used to do this show, didn't we, called An Evening Without. And we used to get Emma Thompson sometimes to come along and help us out. This is like the late 70s, early 80s, right? And then what would happen was she wouldn't turn up because she was, I don't know what she was doing. She was in a movie or something. And I had to sing the songs that she sings like a bird. And
you had to sing a version of Send in the Clowns by Stephen Sondheim. And I'd just like to point out from a musical point of view, it's a beautiful song. It's quite a complex, difficult song to play on the piano, particularly when you're accompanying somebody basically tone deaf singing.
Yeah. Well, someone who's tone deaf accompanied by someone who plays the odd bum note. It wasn't a highlight. Anyway, we digress.
I think let's talk about television, shall we?
Yeah, okay, all right.
Can we start with a piece of news so hot off the press you might not even know it, that Claudia Winkleman and Tess Daly have announced they're going to leave Strictly Come Dancing.
Oh my God!
At the end of the forthcoming series.
Wow.
Yeah, I love that.
I didn't know.
I've got my alerts on and you haven't got yours on, so I've just read that and I'm going to say...
We've been talking for half an hour and you didn't tell me that.
Okay, I'm going to read out some quotes. In a post on Tess Daly's Instagram account, the pair said, they were talking together, there have been some rumblings and we want you to hear this from us. We have some news. After 21 wonderfully joyful years on Strictly, we've decided that the time is right to step aside and pass over the baton, to which Claudia adds the very sparkly baton. We've absolutely loved working as a duo, and hosting Strictly has been an absolute dream. We were always going to leave together and now feels like the right time. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So first thing to say about this, because you and I, we know how to scrutinize an announcement. That doesn't look to me like there's anything behind this other than their personal decisions. Yep. There's not a hint. We might find some briefing coming out later in the day that somebody in the BBC had decided they were a bit off their game, but I'd be very surprised.
Yeah, no, I think that, as you know, we've gone into great detail about my visit to the studios. And
yes.
Did
they look bored?
No.
Did they look as if they'd had enough?
Well, they
are
business
consummate pros. But I think the other thing that you could immediately say is slightly different for Tess than from Claudia, isn't it? Because Claudia has an extraordinary portfolio of programs and probably, the biggest new entertainment format on television, Traitors. She also has the piano on Channel 4. I don't know if that's still going on, but it's a pretty good show. Whereas Tess is very much defined by Strictly Come Dancing. So, it'd be interesting to see in both cases what their plans are. And, what in a way... What it is, it's a bit like dictators dying in their bed, but it's not a very good analogy, is it? But
I'm struggling to make the connection.
No, what I'm saying is,
Stalin and
we
Claudia
all know
Winkleman.
examples of presenters who've gone on doing some program until somebody in a position of power has said time for a change. This to me looks like they've decided to quit at the moment of their choosing, on their terms, giving, if you like, the public plenty of notice, because obviously there's a new series on at the moment. And I think all they'll get from people is applause and congratulations for a great run.
Yeah, but why do you think they've announced it halfway through the series? I mean, when a series is over...
Well, that's a good point. Maybe it was about to leak. Because that would definitely be a reason why you'd rush an announcement out. So what does sometimes happen, absolutely, is that they've got a plan to do it, let's say, just before the final, but it's leaked, and therefore they have to rush an announcement out. That's possible.
Because hasn't it now tilted the PRness of the whole thing, where each week there's a nice story about, well, hopefully a nice story about Strictly, because they keep pumping out, so and so's done this, but now this is going to dominate. This is going to be the long goodbye now for Claudia. They're going to get a standing ovation, and people are going to be giving them flowers, weeping. Isn't it going to kind of tilt the whole thing towards the Claudia?
We wanted to get down the studio again, Jimmy, to join in. Throw
wild dogs on their bended knee would not get me down to that studio again.
It would be just because we're talking about this as this has just been announced. Actually, by the time this podcast goes out, we will be. It'll be interesting to see the spin that you see in the newspapers and in coverage on social media, because it's Strictly suffered all sorts of problems in the last few years. Will this be dressed up as the curse of Strictly continues? Its presenters are leaving. I guess you could argue that finally in The Traitors, the BBC have found an entertainment show that dominates the national conversation more than Strictly.
Yeah.
So if you were a presenter, would you think, or would your agent or manager be saying to you, well, should you join Strictly? Is it going to be entering its twilight years now? It's tricky.
But I think Claudia, as you said, she is a real brand now, and she can probably call the shots. And it'd be interesting to see what she does, really.
Well, she may be happy to do less, because how many shows do you want to be on at any one time? Over the history of television, there've been presenters who at a certain point have been almost ubiquitous and over dominant. I think of Bob Monkhouse.
Yeah.
In the 80s or whenever it was, and half the programs on television were called Bob's Full House or Bob's this or Bob's that. Noel Edmonds would be another example.
Yeah.
And it's funny how at the end of that run, if you take Noel Edmonds as an example, the bubble can burst, and I don't want to say you can be forgotten quite quickly, because he went on to do things like Deal or No Deal. In other words, you can go from being kind of seemingly the public's most loved presenter to you're suddenly not there, and I don't want to say you're forgotten, but you are a bit.
No, it's a cruel business, that business of show.
It is. That's why we're so glad to be behind the camera.
Yeah. Well, it's good never to have been remembered in the first place.
or yet to have been discovered, which is how I like to look at it, Jimmy, being a bit more of a glass half full person than you.
You really are.
I think you and I could yet win Best Newcomer awards.
Well, that's a great way to start the podcast, Peter.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you've got?
The phone on. Well, look, let's move on. Let's move on to another television announcement, which is that Warner Brothers Discovery, because I think this is interesting to us and there's stuff to talk about here, have announced that they're turning TLC, their channel, into an entertainment-focused free-to-air channel from January 2026. So good for them. We approve of entertainment. We approve of...
Hang on. What is TLC? I mean, I know what TLC stands for.
It's not Tender Loving Care. Is it the Learning Channel?
The Learning Channel.
Is that right? Owen is nodding. He's done his research.
Well, I'm learning something new because I've never watched the Learning Channel.
They're basically deciding learning's a bit boring on its own, clearly.
What did they used to show? The things I never watched.
Things that you and I have never watched, mate, I can tell you. Anyway, they've decided, this is what is kind of interesting, that they're going to launch this new entertainment policy with a revival of Mock the Week.
Good. Good for Dan. Good for Dan Patterson.
Good for Dan Patterson,
the producer and creator.
Fat commission, and Graham Lafferty, the senior vice president of content strategy and networks for.
Is he American, Irish, English?
Well, it's Warner Brothers. He's probably American. He said, "This is my favourite bit of this. Part of the reason that we're leaning into Mock the Week is because it is recognisable." Now, can I ask you, Jim, a question? Yes. When do we start leaning into things? Well, this is a linguistic.
After 9 o'clock at night, I have to get something to lean on because I'm really tired by then.
Is this not one of the linguistic cliches of our age that we lean into?
So he's not pivoting.
He's not pivoting.
For fuck's sake, what's happened? What's happened to pivot?
And the very clever people lean in and pivot at the same time.
But what's happened to pivot? It's been replaced by leaning in.
You got to keep up, Jim.
We can't keep up with the semantics of this business anymore.
Here, leaning into is used as a euphemism for commissioning.
Yeah.
Why does he say part of the reason that we're commissioning Mock the Week is because it's recognisable?
Because he's been on an away day. He's been on
an away day. It's definitely a away day talk. He goes on. I'm going to read more. My view is that there was a lot of viewers. That's really ungrammatical. No, I suppose it's grammatical. There were
many viewers. I wouldn't go for a lot of viewers.
Okay,
a lot of viewers is a bit.
My view is that there's a lot of viewers who weren't ready. Who weren't ready. Viewers are who. He's not good at English, this bloke. Who weren't ready for it to be cancelled. I've just improved that. When it was, it still attracted an awful lot of interest And actually, even on social now, it's huge. So I think there's equity in it. There's another linguistic cliche of the word of the modern age. There's equity in it.
There's
What does that
equity
mean?
in it.
It's not,
And you've got to lean into that.
It's not a business. You don't have equity in Mock the Week. I think it's a very strong format, but there is an opportunity, that should be an and, having been away for a little bit of time, to take a look at that.
Well, good luck with it.
This is one of the worst drafted announcements of all time. But who cares about the announcement, you might say. The truth is, as you say, for your old friend and mine, Dan Patterson,
who created Whose Line Is It Anyway as well.
This is the equivalent of when Neighbours was cancelled and then somebody else said, we'll take it over. Did Amazon say we'll take it over and recommission it? This is what the people behind things like The Bill dream of. The moment when you can suddenly recommission the whole thing again.
We've already got a meeting next week, and it's called the Bottom Drawer Meeting. We're going to get to that.
There'll be a lot of dust will be blown off.
Oh my God! Yeah.
But actually, we often talk on this podcast about how tough it is to get entertainment shows away these days.
This is a good announcement.
So what we're finding, while it's tough to get new ideas away, the thing that you thought had come to an end, and you know, so I can give you another example of this because it was a thing that I was behind, is Never Mind the Buzzcocks. Ran for I think 20 years on the BBC, came to an end, and obviously I long left Talkback where
and
it
that was
was
your
made.
Format.
Yeah. Well,
so did you make lots of money when they sold it to Sky?
I came up with the idea and the title and stuff like that. Yeah, unfortunately, when I sold Talkback in 2000, I sold my intellectual property rights.
So you made no money out of this recent...
Out of the Sky, no.
That's terrible. We should have an appeal on your behalf. Because that's terrible, Peter. That
I think the European Court of Human Rights might have something to say about it.
I think there should be some kind of, or a day in honour of Peter not holding the rights to Never Mind the Buzzcocks.
But Talkback, where it was made and is still made, must have thought, 20-year run of Buzzcocks, we're all happy with that. Haven't we done well? And then a couple of years later, Sky commissioned it.
Yeah.
Which is what you least expect. I mean, this must have happened to you at Hat-Trick. What's died and come back to life? The kind of Lazarus formats, we could call them.
Room 101 used to be a radio show, which then Dan Patterson, again, he's popping up a lot. He's brilliant at formats. He's rang me this really great show on it was on Radio 4, and they'd done an iteration of it. BBC had turned it down. BBC Television had turned it down. So I said, well, let's go to Channel 4. So, but first, why don't I just contact Alan Yentob and just tell him that we're going to take it to Channel 4? Because we'd had a kind of history with Whose Line, where Whose Line Is It Anyway? I was in. When I was an actor in the 80s, I was invited to be in an episode of Whose Line on the radio, hosted by our friend Clive Anderson with Stephen Fry and John Sessions. And I was in it with Lenny Henry, and I was terrible. I mean, I literally said hello and goodbye. It was so hard. And John and Stephen were brilliant, and Clive was very funny. So, but with my producer's hat on, we just set up Hat-Trick Productions. It was 1988. I said to Dan, have you ever considered doing this on TV? It'd be a good TV show. And he said, well, actually, the BBC have had it for 9 months. I said,
done nothing with it.
I said, well, you'll wait another year. And so that was in those days. I think they're much better now. But he said, as a man who wants to have his programmes commissioned on the BBC. But I brought Channel 4 along the following week because we were doing Who Dares Wins on Channel 4. So as you know, when you're working with the channel, you get to know them. Mike Bolland and Seamus Cassidy came down. They saw in a BBC studios, Channel 4 executives sat in the audience of the BBC studio. They watched a recording of Whose Line Is It Anyway, which is very similar on radio as it is to TV. 4 people standing at a microphone, and they bought it in the room. They said, we'll have a dozen. So that was the beginning of that. So Dan has got a good nose for a format. And he said to me, Room 101's a good format. I rang Alan up and I said, look, Alan, on Monday, I'm going to Michael Grade and I'm going to pitch Room 101. It's a BBC radio show. He said, well, you can't. I said, well, we can actually, because you've turned it down. He said, what? Oh, when? So anyway, we set it up on the BBC because Alan didn't want it to go on Channel 4.
It was a delicate thing to play the two off against each other. And I can remember, I think it might have been with Buzzcocks, but it was something where I'd got a commitment to a pilot from Channel 4. Yeah. And then the very self-same Alan Yentob committed to a series. And I rang the commissioning editor up and said, look, I'll still do it with Channel 4 if you'll commit to a series, but I have got a series commitment from the BBC. And this commissioning editor, this is why I remember this. In the only time ever in all my time trying to sell programmes, he slammed the phone down on me, leaving me sort of thinking, oh my God, I'll never work at Channel 4 again. And more fool him, really, because if you're an independent producer, I would argue, and I think I was consistent with this when I was a broadcaster, you've got a business to run. If you want to, I don't say play one off against the other. If you want to explore opportunities elsewhere, you've got no obligation, loyalty to one broadcaster who are kind of, can't quite make their mind up or whatever. They've got no rights in what you've got. Of course, you're within your rights to go to another one and try to get a series commissioner. But this particular commissioner, he thought that was an appalling thing to do, and he slammed the phone down on me. And I thought, oh my God, I'll never work at Channel 4 again.
So Room 101 landed on BBC Two successfully with Paul Merton. No, I think it was first with Nick Hancock.
It was, because he was also presenting They Think It's All Over at the time.
Yes.
And he was brilliant. He's a very funny man and a lovely man as well.
And then the programme under Paul Merton, Rowley Keating, the then controller, decided that Room 101 had its day and run its course. So it went into kind of what Americans would call hiatus permanently. And but a few years later, we were talking about Room 101, and Danny Cohen was the new controller of BBC One, I think. And I rang him up and said, how about Room 101? But instead of a one-on-one interview, you may remember in this first iteration, it was a celebrity came on and told you what.
Yeah, just one host, one guest. Yeah.
We turned it into a competition. 3 celebrities come on and they argue the case. It's like the balloon debate. Who can get their thing into Room 101 in that round? And we got Frank Skinner to host it, and he was absolutely brilliant. And that ran for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years. And then it came off again. And guess what? Room 101 has just come back on BBC Radio 4. So who knows? It might well come back. So these classic formats, I think, you can repurpose. And it'll be interesting to see about Mock the Week. Will they bring back Dara O'Brien?
Well, I mean, that's an issue for them and for
maybe
them
it's a role for Tess Daly.
But all who knows? But also interesting is what will qualify as success on TLC, because let's say towards the end, I'm guessing you might know the ratings on BBC Two maybe started in the 2 million era maybe, but by the end they'd have been under 1 million because just the natural decline in linear viewing. But with some catch up and so on, whether Graham Lafferty's thing about social media, that it's huge on social media, is it that huge? I just don't know. But TLC, you're talking about a smaller audience, but you don't know at what level they'll think this was a good investment. They're also doing it, of course, to reposition a channel, and repositioning a channel is a challenging thing, and you can see why using a familiar format might feel like a powerful way of doing that. We've talked about it a few times on the podcast and actually said we won't talk about it anymore. We might choose to have another bite at this story of Paddington and Studio Canal, or as they've now rechristened it on The Rest Is Bullshit, Studio C Anal. It's a very good joke in itself.
This story.
Very good joke in itself.
It's the gift that never stops giving. This
exactly,
story.
and from Spitting Image's point of view, the publicity that never stops giving. I mean, apart from worrying a bit about whether Studio Canal's lawyers are going to bankrupt Avalon, they must be thinking, fantastic, we're back on the front pages once again.
I think where Studio Canal have gone wrong is, and they must at some stage be regretting this, they doubled down. They had a KC presenting the case in court and saying that this was, very offensive and very dangerous.
I'd love to meet it. This is the guy called Tom St. Quentin. What a great name for a barrister. I want to meet him at a party and see what he says, because he's been obliged to say things like, the Avalon puppet depicts the Paddington character with a frightening demeanour. Actually, I find the cocaine snorting gangster Paddington,
Funny.
rather sweet and cuddling. I don't find him frightening in the least. The filing then goes on to list all the reasons they feel that the Avalon Paddington is a distortion or mutilation of the marmalade-loving bear from the books. They include the fact that he uses coarse language and acts as a promoter of gun sales and sex romance. I just wouldn't want to be Tom St. Quentin, a barrister who's got to keep a straight face if it ends up in court.
He's thinking of all the money he's making. Look, he's a lawyer. He's thinking of all the money he's making. And he's thinking, Studio Canal, bring it on with your stupid writ. I'll milk this dry.
I've got a memory of a thing that happened that caused me a lot of discomfort, I'll be honest, which is this, that when we sold Talkback to Fremantle, as it became, in 2000, which was a very, and it was a harmonious relationship, and Fremantle were very, enjoyed working for the people at Fremantle. But there was one moment of discomfort, and it was a big moment of discomfort. We'd already made at that point Chris Morris's original series, Brass Eye. So Brass Eye was, if you like, in the rearview mirror, and it had been a highly acclaimed but very controversial series. But we had in the pipeline the Brass Eye Paedophilia Special, the one-off, which became an enormous media story. And it went out, let's say, on Friday night, and by the Sunday, it was the main item on the news and headlines in all the big newspapers. And Fremantle didn't like it, and they for the first and probably only time while I was there, I would get phone calls from the head of legal or the head of press or the head of whatever you have heads of, head of paper clips, I don't know, saying, "What are we doing? Why have we done this? Why have we made this program?" And then I get somebody else who would ring up and say, "Did we make a lot of money out of it?" To which I hate to say the answer was no, not really. It was a one-off comedy for Channel 4. You don't exactly make a lot of money out of that. But they didn't get it. They wanted us to be making programs that were long-running series with predictable and high margins that caused no upset in the world at all. And I found myself sort of trying to say, yeah, but you don't see, when you bought Talkback and you paid a good price for it, this is one of the reasons you did so, because we didn't just make long-running programs that didn't ruffle any feathers or whatever. But I felt I was on the naughty step, whereas I was actually thinking this is one of the most remarkable things I've ever been involved in.
Well, you've summed it up. I think that the reason why they buy companies like why big corporations buy sexy independent production companies is that you bring new talent, new ideas, you're different, you're not just churning out moving wallpaper. But then, of course, like you say, the people who buy you, the chief executives and the people at the top who come and meet you and buy you and see the big picture, you then hand it over to a whole group of other executives.
Yes, who had no part in the decision.
Who have no part in that, who see you as being a bit of a pain in the ass, and you're very costly, and now you're making a fuss, and it doesn't please them, and I think that is the problem. And I think that was 25 years ago, Peter, wasn't it? I mean, I think that these days, I think maybe the more experienced buyers of companies like yours and mine, I think they are slightly more laissez-faire. I don't know whether I haven't spoken to anybody recently who's locked horns with their owners, but it's a difficult relationship, because also the other downside is the people who work at the production company feel that they're being restricted, and there's nothing worse in our game than the creative people feeling that they're being governed by the man,
No, of course. But if you go back to Paddington again, is there any way in which Spitting Images' parody of Paddington could damage the brand? Well, I would argue the only way in which it could is if you endlessly fan the flames of this thing and give it more publicity. Exactly what Studio Canal are doing.
Well, we tried to get John Thoday, the man behind Avalon, and who's funding 10 episodes of this from his own pocket, and he couldn't make it on. We only called him yesterday, a bit too short notice. But he did say, I texted him, and I said, "You got any comments?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I think this may not be the best use of court time." I said, "But I just want to put it on the record. I'm a big fan of Paddington 2.
Me too. Me too. And a universe can exist in which we can enjoy Paddington as a marmalade sandwich eating bear, and we can also enjoy Spitting Image portraying him in a slightly different way. The universe is big enough for both things.
Well, I think the only reputation that's being damaged in all of this is that of Studio Canals.
So what else have we got? We've got maybe one other thing that we can talk about today. The BBC have published results from the Our BBC, Our Future survey. I can't get past this without just quickly adding something I've said before, my objection to this word our. Our NHS, our BBC. Yes. Nobody talks about our civil service. Nobody talks about our army, but they are also ours. So it's this use of the word our to give some cuddly sense of
you wouldn't lean into that, would you?
I wouldn't lean into that.
I'd pivot away from it.
But anyway, let's not. Don't let me get on a hobby horse, Jimmy.
No, but they've got to come out with these surveys, the BBC. I mean, I understand why they do it.
They come and they state the bleeding obvious, and so they've asked a lot of people. Do you think the BBC should continue to make good programs?
But people lie on
people
surveys.
Say yes.
People lie. You know,
well, they. I don't think they lie. They lean in a slightly different. They lean into it. They lean in a slightly different direction than they do in real life. So they say they base. It's like saying, "What do you want to eat?" And you say, "I'd like to eat some. I want to eat my greens. I want more vegetables." They actually want more pizza, but when being asked, they want more vegetables. So would you believe more people in this survey are saying they want to see more documentaries on the BBC than are saying they want to see more entertainment? This would be very disappointing, pointing to our friend Graham Lafferty, who's leaning into Mock the Week and repositioning TLC, the learning channel, as an entertainment channel. Because oddly enough, people being asked by the BBC sound as if they want to turn the BBC into a learning channel. But they don't mean it. They actually want to watch the celebrity traitors.
I was once at the Edinburgh TV Festival when I used to go years ago. It's about the late 90s, I think. And they were doing a session on taste and language in TV shows. And William Stewart, remember William G. Stewart?
Yeah, William G. Stewart. What did the G stand for? Do we know?
I don't know, actually.
He did style himself William G. Stewart. There we are.
It had a kind of Edward G. Robinson feel about it.
He created Harry S. Truman.
And
he created 15 to 1.
And he hosted it because he said he did the run through for Channel 4.
It was a Richard Osman situation,
And they said, you were great, do it. Anyway, he was hosting it, and on the panel there was David Baddiel and a man called Colin Green, I think, who was then the head of the British Standards Council. I think I've got his name right. Anyway, they were talking about taste, and David, of course, would say this. He said, why we can just sometimes now use the F word on TV after 9 o'clock. Why can't we say the word So a frisson went through the hall as the C word rippled around the room. And so they're having questions from the floor, and they were handing around the thing. And Colin Green said, well, actually, we have done some surveys on this word. And I thought, well, really? So Colin Green said they did a survey last year where they went up and down the country asking people who were out doing their shopping whether they thought the word was offensive. And I just wanted to be there when they were doing that. Madam, put down your shopping. Let me say one word to you. Let me say, how do you feel about So Colin Green did something I thought was really mean. when he was being challenged about this survey, he said, well, actually, I wasn't involved in it, but we have somebody in the room and named her. She actually carried out the survey. So they put the microphone under this woman's nose and she was just dying of death. And she was explaining. So anyway, the microphone came around and I got the microphone. And I said, I'd like to ask a question. How much did the survey cost? And she went bright red. And she said, well, it cost about £50,000.
Fucking hell.
I said, well, listen, next time you want to check that word out, ring me up and I'll charge you half that. And I'll tell you that, yes, it's a very offensive word.
Well, when I was at the BBC, there was a famous memo called the twat memo. And what it explained...
You've got to narrow it down at the BBC. Who is that about?
Not a memo sent by twats, but this memo, which people did sort of take seriously, kind of solemnly explained that the word twat was a regional issue. It was more offensive in Yorkshire than in Kent for reasons that I can't remember.
Well, there are more twats in Yorkshire than in Kent.
If you were like me, there's plenty of twats in Kent, which is where I come from, and you thought, well, it's only a middlingly offensive word. It was basically warning you that in Leeds or Bradford or somewhere, people get really offended by it. So,
but they're very slow to offence in Yorkshire. They don't get offended very easily.
No, not at all.
Anyway, I'm going to lean into the end of the show.
That's all for this week. Thank you very much for listening. Any questions about the world of television you've always wanted to ask, send them our way. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, you can email us or use our socials, or just why don't you tune into our YouTube channel and subscribe to that. But just on a final note, the G in William Stewart, Owen's just texted me, it stands for Gladstone. William Gladstone really, Stewart, rest in peace.
Distinguished name, isn't it? Whereas, does everybody know this? The S in Harry S. Truman stood for nothing. He never had a second name. He just added the S to make himself sound a bit more important. What does the C in Studio C anal stand for?
Well, it goes back to the survey they did about that word, I think. Anyway, we've said goodbye once. We can't say it again. Get off the air.
Okay. Thank you for listening.